Welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin.
Welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with board-certified criminal trial attorney Daniel T. Geherin. I'm Evan Mack. Once again, world-famous golfer Tiger Woods finds himself in the headlines for a recent arrest in Florida. Dan, as a former prosecutor and a board-certified criminal justice attorney, what can you tell us about this case with Mr. Woods?
Hey, Evan, thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk about this case. Oh, Tiger Woods, here you go again, right? I mean, Tiger Woods has found himself in the news every 5 years or so, and not for his victories on the golf courses, but rather for his brushes with the law, and most specifically, driving offenses, right? He's had accidents outside of his home. He's had accidents in California, and now recently he was arrested outside of his home in Jupiter, Florida, and he's charged with several misdemeanors as a result of it. For those of you that don't know, either because you haven't followed sports or you haven't seen the news, Tiger Woods was driving his car in broad daylight. He allegedly looked at his phone and looked up, crashed into a truck that was stationary, flipped his car. When police investigated, they suspected that he might be either drunk or high. He had 2 painkillers in his pocket. They gave him a breath test, and that came back at zeros. They asked him to take a chemical test, in this instance a urine test, and he declined. He refused. They did field sobriety tests, and in the police's estimation, they believed he was visibly impaired or under the influence of perhaps those painkillers, so they arrested him. And as we sit here now, he's charged with operating under the influence of controlled substance, destruction of property related to the accident, and most interestingly to me, refusal of a chemical test rights, which is a misdemeanor in Florida. So Tiger Woods back in the news, not for good reason here, but the parallels that I can get from this case and people in Michigan can get, take away his celebrity status, his golfing status, and hundreds of people every day in the state of Michigan find themselves on the wrong end of the law, charged with impaired driving, intoxicated driving, even if they have no alcohol in their system. And I'm happy to sort of talk about that and the defenses to that and how we handle those cases.
Yeah, people tend to get that kind of confused because somebody has a high-profile fame or notoriety or maybe even money that they can't be stopped for, being impaired. You know what I mean? I think we don't understand how much that happens. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. I mean, my practice, about 40% of it year in and year out, is defending drivers who are either drinking, using controlled substance, under the influence of prescription drugs, or a combination of both. And it's a busy practice, right? And so people are unbeknownst until they're pulled over. And so it's not always alcohol, like in Tiger Woods' case. In fact, we're seeing increasingly it's substances other than alcohol, which is probably the most unique part of this practice that I've seen evolve in my 30 years in the criminal justice system.
So you mentioned that, there was no alcohol in the system and, he kind of refused it like the urine sample. Is it rare for someone to get arrested for impaired driving without alcohol?
It used to be, yes. I would say when I started my defense practice in the year 2000, I don't think I had maybe 1 or 2 cases that were unrelated to alcohol. Almost all of them were alcohol related. You had an occasional person who had heroin in his system or had marijuana in his system, and it was evident that they were under the influence. But for the most part, it was alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. And that's because police then didn't have the technology, didn't have the training, the skills to detect when someone was under the influence of something other than alcohol. Think about all the breathalyzers and preliminary breath tests and all of the training that officers go through. It's alcohol-based. And now what we've seen over the past 20 years with people using recreational marijuana, with marijuana legalized and people using prescription marijuana, with all of the painkillers that people are on and prescription drugs that people are on, combined with other recreational drugs, even things you don't think about, Molly and inhalants and things that can affect a person. Police have had to change their way of enforcing. They've had to change their way of trying to prove these cases. And that is why we have seen a higher volume of cases like Mr. Woods, who didn't have any alcohol in his system, but finds himself charged with impaired due to some controlled substance.
So when impaired driving involves the drugs or that controlled substance, like you mentioned, how do police show that someone was intoxicated or impaired? The field sobriety test, does that kind of, apply to the same thing?
No question about it, right? So you hit the nail on the head. Standardized field sobriety tests or field sobriety tests are going to be the biggest clue, right? So police officers are going to administer the tests that are approved by their particular state. In Michigan, generally 3 tests. You've got a walk and turn, you've got a leg lift, you've got an eye test called nystagmus. These are tests that officers are looking to see if someone can pay attention to their instructions and can deliver physically, cross tasks so that a person is asked to pay attention and then deliver physically. But there's other clues that police can look for. The driving, if someone is in a fender bender, there's no explanation for it. That can be attributed to impairment a la Tiger Woods. Police have some technology at the scenes. They've experimented with these saliva tests in Michigan where someone can test for marijuana. They haven't used those much because of the legalization of marijuana, and it's not per se illegal to have marijuana in your system when you're driving. But outside of that, you've got the good old-fashioned DREs, drug recognition experts. Every police department is starting to train officers to be DREs. These are specially trained officers who come to a scene to evaluate a person, and they are supposed to be able to determine whether they are under the influence of a controlled substance or prescription drugs different than alcohol. Not every agency can afford DREs. Not every DRE is particularly great, but those are the tools to answer your question on how they're trying to show someone is impaired due to substances as opposed to alcohol.
Mm. How does the procedure compare to if if he had been arrested in the state of Michigan as opposed to Florida?
Really, the big differences are, number one, I mentioned before, the refusal. Florida just passed a law to say, you know what, drivers, if you refuse a chemical test, right, and it's an unreasonable refusal, i.e. the officer had a justification to ask you to take the test, not only are you going to face an administrative loss of license and points on your license, like most states do, you're going to be charged with a crime. So he's charged with a misdemeanor for refusing that chemical test right. That's significant, and I'm keeping my eye on that to see if Michigan will do that too, because for a lot of people, a misdemeanor hurts beyond imagination, right? People applying for jobs, young people, people who have a job where they're licensed as a real estate agent, doctor, lawyer, they're going to lose their licensing with a misdemeanor conviction. So that refusal no longer just pulls your license in Florida, gets you charged with a crime. The second big difference in Florida, for reasons I can't fully understand, Evan, they didn't get a warrant to test his blood. Now, that's rare. In Michigan, it is almost formulaic. You refuse, officer's going to get on the phone with a prosecutor, a judge. They're going to sign a warrant. It's pretty easy to get one, and a needle's going to go in a driver's arm whether he likes it or not. They can even hold a person down. They didn't do that here, and it probably has to do with his celebrity status, right? Because I think if that was John Doe driving, there would have been a needle in his arm, even forcibly. So that's a difference between Michigan and Florida. And lastly, Tiger Woods did have a prior conviction. It was reduced to reckless driving several years ago. How that plays into what happens here in Michigan, if you have 2 reckless drivings in 7 years or a drunk driving and a reckless driving within 7 years, that can enhance the penalty, it can enhance the driver's license sanction. So some minute differences between Michigan and Florida, with the very big one being the additional misdemeanor charge that Mr. Woods is facing.
Yeah, when I remember reading it before when I found that he refused the test, at first glance it felt like that was a smart thing to do. Do you agree with that or no?
It's probably the most common question I get, right? My friends ask me that. People I grew up with in this town ask me that. The calls I get late at night from clients ask me that. And actually, the reality is refusing very rarely has good positive effects, because if you refuse, almost certainly you're losing your driver's license for a year here in the state of Michigan. And think about who can afford to not have a license with jobs and families and all of that. So you're losing your license for a year. You're getting 6 points and all that goes with that, with the insurance rates and so forth. And they're putting a needle in your arm, whether you like it or not, to get your blood. And so it really doesn't do a lot for you. Here's the one exception to that. And it's going to sound a little bit dirty, for lack of a better word. If someone is hovering at the legal limit, they had 2 glasses of wine, they don't like the way the officer's treating them, the officer's sort of assuming their guilt, a refusal there might buy enough time before the warrant is issued so that their blood alcohol level might be below a 0.8, Michigan's cutoff level. In that very small instance, maybe your refusal is worth the loss of license for a year to not be charged or convicted with a crime. Outside of that, in most instances, a refusal is going to have a particularly negative effect on a driver here in Michigan.
What possible defense might Tiger Woods have, to get out of this case, if any?
Well, let's start with the idea he's going to have good lawyers, right? His pocketbook is certainly big enough. they're going to start with the idea that the accident was due to distraction. All of us, bad as it is, have our cell phones in the car, and he told the police he looked down at his cell phone. So they're going to say, Judge, or ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the accident wasn't due to impairment. It was due to looking at his cell phone. So that's going to be the starting point. Then they're going to go after with a vengeance what the police officers did in the field sobriety test. This is a guy who's had knee surgeries, back surgeries, issues physically from being an athlete. They're going to say he didn't do well on that because he's physically unable to do well, not to do with his impairment. They're going to challenge any sort of warrants that the Florida prosecutors are trying to get at his prescription records. And then they've got the celebrity effect, right? Is a jury going to want to convict someone like Tiger Woods with no alcohol in his system, no chemical test rights, and on the word of an officer who may not be a DRE and may not have a lot of experience? I'd say they got their work cut out for him. On the other side, that video that I have seen of Tiger Woods does not look good. He certainly looks to be impaired. Right?
Crazy.
How the jury, the judge, and his attorneys spin that remains to be seen. But those are the primary defenses that would be employed or that we would look to employ here in Michigan if someone came to us.
Why do they release that footage, Dan? Why have we seen that footage?
Yeah, I remember for a lot of times you wouldn't see a video or footage until someone was charged with a crime, and that's really changed. Police agencies are now releasing these into the press when there's a police-involved shooting or there's a celebrity. Sometimes you have news agencies like TMZ getting those videos improperly or through some source, and they just put it out there. So I don't know if the police necessarily released it or if it just got TMZ'd here, but you are seeing that more frequently. I mean, an example, Justin Timberlake's test, it came out 2 years later, and he tried to fight it. So I think it depends on jurisdiction. It depends on what, the TMZs of the world have done to get it. In this case, in Tiger Woods, it certainly came out pretty quickly.
So when someone gets arrested for impaired driving in Michigan, how can you help?
I always tell people, drunk driving is no longer a smack on the wrist as it was 25 years ago. There are really significant consequences, loss of license, loss of freedom. There are judges that I can name if I wanted to that put first offenders in jail universally. And so you're facing all these sanctions. You don't want to walk in there alone or walk in there with an attorney that practices employment law or draws wills and trusts every day. You want an attorney that does defend drunk driving, that goes through training, that has been doing it for 30 years and has a track record of success. And so here's how we can help. 3 ways. 1, we can often litigate if the police officers made a mistake, if the police officers violated Constitution, if they were not trained properly. We are trained to find that and help in litigation. Second, negotiation. Oftentimes prosecutors charge one offense. We're able to negotiate down to keep someone's driver's license, to keep the penalty and the sentencing less severe. And lastly, I'll just call it peace of mind, right? It is never pleasant walking into a courtroom with a judge, a prosecutor, probation agents, the unknown of that, the anxiety of that. So even if we can't litigate or negotiate, we can take away that fear, that anxiety. We can walk a client through exactly what's going to happen, answer their questions, both behind the scenes and in the courtroom. And that can be worth its weight in gold. So litigation, negotiation, peace of mind, and sometimes all 3 of those things.
Good stuff. Damn, appreciate his time, brother.
Thanks for having us, Evan. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for joining us. For more on defending serious criminal cases in Michigan, head to glgmichigan.com. Don't forget to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Evan.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.